Governor Kate Brown released her recommended $25 billion state budget for the next 2 years, and it includes closing 3 of Oregon's 16 prisons. Now, remember, the budget still needs to be adopted. These are just recommendations right now, but if adopted, these 3 prisons would shut down, according to the governor's proposal. Shutter Creek Correctional Institution in North Bend, Warner Creek Correctional Institution in Lakeview, and Mill Creek Correctional Facility in Salem. The governor said, quote, "Oregon no longer needs to maintain costly prison capacity and can now move forward with reductions in beds while maintaining appropriate supervision of adults in custody and keeping Oregonians safe." Now, activists, they might be very happy to hear that, but I'm not sure. But the rural communities that rely on those prisons for hundreds of jobs, they may wonder kind of what this all means for them. Not to mention the questions about what we do with the prisoners. Now, at times, the answer to that often comes down to other forms of rehabilitation, like maybe with a doctor or a counselor or at a hospital. But hospitals, they kind of have their own problems right now. The governor's budget proposal calls for big cuts. Yeah, you heard me correctly there. Cuts to hospitals during a pandemic. Now, for some more context on that, I called KGW political analyst Len Bergstein to kind of walk us through really what that means, why those calls are being made right now. And here's some of our conversation.
When you hear kind of the headline that the governor is proposing cuts to hospitals, all we've been talking about is how thinly they've been, worked during COVID and how elected procedures are down big time, which is one of the big moneymakers for hospitals. So for the average person, they're thinking, wait a minute, how are they cutting funding to those entities? Can you explain more the thinking behind that?
Hospital financing is a very complicated thing, and over the years, the hospitals have probably felt like they've given their share at the office to help with the Oregon health plan or whatever. They, in fact, do generate a tremendous amount of money, though, particularly in terms of the numbers of procedures that they're able to generate through electives or others. Their emergency rooms are big moneymakers, and so if you look through the intricacies of hospital financing, they do okay. Now, when they are in a pandemic and they have to deal with these high-cost procedures and they have to shut down their elective procedures, they wind up being in a crunch. And I'm sure that they were hoping that there would be some sort of other tax and spending tools that the governor would use to help really kind of refill the budget gap, as opposed to kind of cutting back on procedures or payments.
The other controversy that we're talking about has to do with prisons. It's interesting. There have been a lot of calls to abolish prisons, and maybe the governor is listening because she's considering abolishing 3 of them, closing 3 of our state's prisons down. What's your take on that?
Well, I think that's you take a ticket and watch the fight. I mean, those are going to be very big budget battles, because the prisons not only represent a way to take care of a certain population, whatever, but they also are economic engines for communities. North Bend and Lakeview are, I think, 2 of the areas, and Salem being the 3rd. These are critical parts of their economies, and the governor's taken that into consideration, but she just looked at the problem, wants to get out of the business of warehousing prisoners, and this was an area where I think she can save something like $50 million over a budget cycle or 2. So it's a big savings, but it's a big controversy.
I'm sure we'll be talking about more controversies when it comes to a budget that big during a time like we're living through right now. But obviously, we are talking a lot about cuts right now. But the governor also wants to allocate millions of dollars toward housing, $66 million for housing and homelessness, $20 million in homeowner assistance, and $250 million in affordable housing development. Now, as far as small business assistance is concerned, the governor said we're more or less relying on the federal government, on Congress, to do something, to get their act together and pass some type of bill. And if you have a small business, that's something that needs to happen fast, because those benefits are going to expire on December 31st.